The warmest of greetings to you, and welcome to Happily Ever Teaching. This is the podcast to help you enthrall your learners in every subject under the sun using the best teaching method known to science, storytelling. To do this, we feature special guest educators who are passionately keen for your children to become amazing and successful human beings. I am storyteller Chip Cahoon, and with me today is...
Hi, I'm Helen, and I teach reception and Year 1 children at the moment at a small school in Buckinghamshire.
And I'm Nicola, and I teach Year 6 children at a school in Hampshire, and I've spent time in my career also teaching students at Teacher Training College at university.
And today we are exploring learning outcomes in history and religious education, with a folktale found all around the world on the importance of balance, adapted by us to feature legendary pirate queen Grace O'Malley. You can listen to the story by downloading our sister podcast, Fables and Fairy Tales, or search our website, epictales.co.uk, for Pirate Grace and the Mermaid Medicine. There you'll find a video of me telling the story that you can share with your children. And if you sign up as an Epic Educator, you'll also get a copy as an ebook or paperback, beautifully illustrated by Erica Terry Rose, as well as the full audiobook for you to download at any time. There are even some tips there for telling the story yourself, and a whole heap of resources to go with the lesson ideas we're about to discuss, including any extra lesson ideas that we don't have time to fit into this podcast. Right now, though, let's continue our discussion with Helen and Nicola, and we've chosen a bit of an unusual pairing this time. We usually stick history with geography, but we've paired it with RE today. So let's start at the lower end of the school and see the history that Helen has pulled out. And I'm loving the alliteration that just came up there. Helen, what is the history you've got for ages 4 to 7?
I've got a project based all around pirates. And I know, obviously, pirates in history were not always very likeable characters, but there's something that draws young children to the idea of pirate ships and sailing the seven seas and finding treasure and things like that.
It really is.
Yeah, there really is. Just today at school during a forest school session, some children built a pirate ship. We haven't been doing about pirates, but they built a pirate ship. They were being captains. They had a cannon pointed at me. It was all very dramatic. So there's something that draws children to pirates. So I thought we couldn't pass up the opportunity to look at that. So I thought maybe look at a pirate ship from history, what that looks like, the parts that it has. Obviously, you're going to build one outdoors using all kinds of materials and the children's imagination to do some role play and look at the ship's crew, the different roles that they would have. You could even compare it to a modern ship's crew, maybe, if you had the time and an inclination. And part of that history curriculum is all around comparing, comparisons between now and then.
Yes.
So have a look at those jobs. Obviously, lots of role play of doing those jobs, as we often mention.
Speaking of comparisons, could you also compare it with things like castles or even just being at home? Because I'm thinking how at home or in a castle, you will have your kitchen.
Yes.
Whereas on your ship, you will have your galley. So there are just different words for the same sort of space.
That'd be really interesting. They could almost design a pirate ship, having learned a bit about them, design their own pirate ship that's going to be their pirate ship with all the different areas they need, and again, as you say, compare that with their home. What's going to be similar to their home? What do they need that's similar to their home? What won't they have in this pirate ship that is firstly a ship and secondly is however many years ago?
Yeah,
that could be really interesting. So have a good look at pirate ships and the ship's crew, and then I thought it'd be interesting to look at some famous pirates. Is the pirate in this story
Grace? Yes, she is real.
I was going to say there's a pirate, Grace O'Malley. Is that
Grace
the one?
O'Malley, yes.
Tell me more.
The Grace in this story is very much based on Grace O'Malley, right. and she did go on to marry Donald. I think he was her first husband. But she had an amazing life. She met Queen Elizabeth I and managed to come away with both her head and her freedom, which is pretty impressive for anyone meeting Queen Elizabeth I.
Let alone a pirate,
Yes. But there's also a wonderful story. We don't know whether it's is complete legend or how much of it is fact. But she gave birth, and almost immediately after the birth, her ship was attacked. So she sort of picked up her child, grabbed a cutlass, and went and fought off the invaders while cuddling her newly swaddled child.
Wow.
And to all accounts, managed to survive that battle. So yeah, she's a fantastic character to explore.
I think children would really, really enjoy learning about her. It's an important part of the history curriculum is learning about specific historical characters. And I think the more engaging a historical character you can find, the better.
Yes.
The children would love learning about her. I love the fact it's a woman as well, a woman pirate, because, children still have stereotypical ideas about who can be a pirate, who can be a captain. So I think that would be fantastic to do a bit of research and learning about Grace O'Malley.
Definitely. And it's interesting thinking of kids' love of pirates, because it's sort of that element of rebelliousness, isn't it, against authority figures, which you alluded to last week when we were talking about the PSHE, Nicola. So I'm wondering, is that where you're sort of going with your history for ages 7 to 11?
Kind of. I was thinking about despotic leaders, sort of authoritarian figures that have absolute monarchy. Kind of links quite nicely to Elizabeth I comment. The idea, that Grace O'Malley managed to survive, but here was a leader, just like her father, King Henry VIII, that had autocratic rule. What he said went. And in history, there's been so many figures like that, and ideas like, for example, so we mentioned Henry VIII, but James VI, Charles I, and the fact that sort of authority led to the English Civil War. And discussing, a bit like we mentioned a couple of podcasts ago, the idea, is that the way to lead? Is that a good leader? And actually the fact it led to the English Civil War, which obviously led to a lot of changes in our society, isn't a bad thing. But some leaders seem to be good leaders that were like that. King Louis XIV of France has quite a favourable reputation for building and for his battles that he had, and has got a good reputation, but he was still like Grace's dad in the story. So is that right in our society nowadays? Today, obviously, we've changed a lot in our societies in the last sort of 500 years, but discussing that in history, I think, is nice. Greek mythology, there's other figures like King Midas. Do you remember he touched things, they turned to gold. His greed, his selfishness kind of has a parallel really to the captain in the story, perhaps, and looking at other stories from mythology, perhaps that share that same moral, that same background.
Yeah, it's interesting when we do get these characters in folktales, they usually go through some sort of trial that involves challenging their selfishness or their greed or their even just their sense of self-aggrandizement.
I mean, that leads beautifully on to RE, the idea of these leaders. I mean, in history, but also linked to RE, there's some fantastic figures in the Bible that did similar things. King Nebuchadnezzar II, who ruled the Neo-Babylonian Empire about 600 years before Jesus, was very famous for his military prowess and being a fantastic builder. Building Babylon. It's history and RE kind of together, but that idea of that rule and getting a good job created for the country, getting things changed maybe for the good. You could easily lead on with history, the Romans and how they conquered, but was that right? Is it right for other people to conquer and obviously bring that into today's speak as well, have conversations about politics?
Yeah, and of course it's certainly in Britain we live in a democracy, so we elect our leaders, but there are still quite a few autocracies. I mean, in a way, a school becomes an autocracy once the head teacher's put in place. I mean, I suppose it depends on the head teacher and how they choose to run things, but there are companies out there that have managers. You've got your Jeff Bezos and your Elon Musks, who could be seen as modern day kings lording over their kingdoms, and what they say goes. And obviously they've been very successful with it, so you can talk about the merits and disadvantages of autocracies compared to democracies very, very extensively, I should imagine. And it's interesting as well hearing you sort of relate it to characters in the Old Testament, because of course in the New Testament there are plenty of parables which describe the behaviors of kings or the consequences of servants to the king, and Jesus himself is often likened to having the position of a king. Were you going to be leading on to that with your Ari?
Yeah, absolutely. And well, having the conversation with children about God, and is God an authoritarian leader? Having a very open discussion potentially about, is it God's will that makes things happen in the world, or do we have free will? Talking about that, is God in control or are we in control in terms of the choices we make? The idea that when God brought the flood to the earth, and obviously saved Noah and his family and 2 of every animal, which is a nice link to the ships again, actually.
Yes. I was thinking that's got another link.
It's a nice link. But again, God said he would never do that again. And just discussing, God decided to, kill the inhabitants of the planet and save just a few because of the bad behavior. It's nice links in the Bible to that as well.
Yeah.
And also Jesus, you mentioned Jesus about how he shared his parables, but he also led by example as well in his stories.
Yes,
so, the idea that we talked about sharing earlier in a previous podcast and good morals, and how Jesus, shared the fish and the bread before him.
That's true.
And giving the food to people. So making a bit like Grace giving the medicine to the people on the ship, Jesus gave the bread and the food to the people.
Yeah.
Just thinking of early RE units I've taught, there's a really nice link to sort of that we do sort of bigger question type RE, and there's a question around who should you follow, and that links really nicely into this, that idea of the idea of leaders that we've talked about, the idea of exploring the figure of Jesus, and then you've got the figure of the captain. Who should you follow? It'd be really interesting to look at the biblical figures in that way.
Yeah. That's sadly all we have time for in this episode, folks. If you'd like to talk to us about anything you've heard in this podcast, or if there's a subject you are soon to teach that you'd like us to cover, you can find us on social media using @TeachHappily, or leave us a review using your favourite podcast app. Please do also share this podcast with your colleagues and help us start a story-led revolution in classrooms around the world, so children everywhere can learn in a way that's effective, memorable, and enjoyable all at the same time. Tomorrow, Pirate Grace will help us explore art, design, and technology. But right now, it only remains for us to say cheerio, and we hope to hear your story soon. So,
cheerio!
And we hope to hear your story soon.